Day 815 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at those Russian losses, as currently, Russia sits on more than 492,000 military personnel losses, which represents an additional 1,210 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 16 tanks, 35 APVs, and a whopping 48 artillery. Then we'll head right to the map as explosions rocked the city of Vyborg in Russia's Leningrad region. Flames engulfed an oil depot following the blasts, lighting up the night sky with an ominous orange glow. The suspected cause was due to Ukrainian UAVs, which travelled a distance of approximately 1,000 kilometers, which should be considered densely protected Russian airspace. But that also seemed not to be the case further south, as Ukrainian drones launched a nocturnal assault on a military airfield and an oil refinery in Kushevskaya in the Krasnodar Krai region. Now, reportedly, this location had dozens of aircraft present, such as the Su-34, Su-25, Su-27, and MiG-29s, used for attacks on Ukrainian territory. But as for now, the damage that was inflicted is yet to be determined. And then, just nearby on the map, and once again, with an ongoing apparent lack of Russian air defenses, which led to another UAV strike that targeted an oil refinery in the Russian city of Slavansk just last night. Video footage captured the dramatic moment when the unmanned aerial vehicle unleashed its payload, causing significant damage to the facility. The attack forced the immediate shutdown of the refinery, halting its operations and disrupting the local oil supply. And all of these events come as there was additional one-way aerial sorties from Ukraine targeting other Russian military assets, such as the ones reported at Sevastopol and Novorossiysk. So there has really been no shortage of activity on this front in the last week. Then headed across to the Ukrainian map today, as overnight as well, the Ukrainian military destroyed 37 out of 37 Russian Shahed drones, which is a higher than average interception rate, very likely attributable to recent aid packages Ukraine has received over the past few weeks, with many of those aid packages placing particular emphasis on air defense systems and their munition supplies. Then briefly, we'll head across to the north of Kharkiv, as there has been a number of daring offensive operations, counter-offensive operations by the AFU that has seemed to have dealt a significant blow to the adversary's grip on the region on the bordering north section, which has in fact led to a considerable influx of captured Russian POW soldiers, which has me putting together quite the expansive list of Russian military mobilization blunders in that later segment. Oh, and around the same time, we saw the Russian army looters back in action, with a video appearing online showing Russian occupiers looting the houses of locals in the Vovchansk area on the outskirts of the embattled town. Now, it's not the most egregious of offences, but it still makes me sick, and is something I used to call a bit of a dick move. Then moving further central east of Ukraine's map, as Ukrainian forces had a similar outcome in Chasiv Yar, where the AFU had successfully thwarted a Russian assault on the town, with President Zelensky reporting that Russia suffered significant losses in both personnel and military hardware during the failed offensive. Then, somewhere in the east, we saw a single Ukrainian FPV drone decimate a Russian tank. I couldn't believe it when I first saw it. Single drone, tank, objective completed. Then, also somewhere in the east, Ukrainian military from the 110th Separate Mechanized Brigade shot down a Russian Su-25 attack aircraft in the Donetsk region, with the Ukrainian crews on this occasion using quite the dynamic language to state that their forces issued quote-unquote fiery fines to Russian pilots for illegally crossing the border. They also stated that Ukrainian skies will become hell for the occupying pilots, and that their air defense team numbers are poised to increase, making it a nightmare for Russian pilots. Then also in the east, and thank our lucky stars for this rare occasion, as we saw a Russian self-propelled mortar known as the Kosta in the Donetsk region. So these 120mm self-propelled mortars are based off the 122 self-propelled howitzer vehicle design of the Soviet Vozdika platforms, with these rare Kostas having a range of about 10 to 15 kilometers, give or take, with these platforms more suitable for indirect fire against infantry and lightly protected targets, especially in more confined or rugged terrains. Now, only about 50 of these were ever produced, which means it's unlikely we'll see another copy of one of these platforms again for this destroyed target anytime soon. Then also in the east, we saw a Ukrainian tank destroy a Russian armoured personnel carrier with direct fire from 2 shots. Then we'll head to Crimea because after the non-stop targeting from the AFU onto Russian military sites within the peninsula itself, we were then made privy to the latest Russian naval loss somewhere within the adjacent Black Sea, as overnight the defense forces of Ukraine destroyed a sea minesweeper of the Russian Navy of the 266M project, aka the Kovrovets, and I'm sure we'll be hearing a lot more about that one soon. Then we'll head across to some news for today. And so starting off, the Ukraine Defense Contact Group, or the UDCG, is set to convene its 22nd Ramstein format summit tomorrow, May 20th. US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff Charles Brown will lead the US delegation, with the meeting which has been held regularly since the group's formation in just April 2022. Which will bring together defense ministers and heads from nearly 50 nations to coordinate ongoing military support for Ukraine. During the previous gathering on April 26th, US Defense Secretary Austin unveiled a substantial $6 billion military aid package for Ukraine under the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative, and in March, Germany also pledged new military assistance worth $540 million, demonstrating the international community's ongoing commitment to bolster Ukraine's defensive capabilities in the face of ongoing aggression. Then, as for a piece of unusual hardware news, to take a peek at Ukraine's latest drone developments. With this footage I have right here, a little bit blurry, but it appears to be testing some sort of sidearm or sub-MG with a high cyclic fire rate, with a fairly obvious but not overly detrimental recoil to boot, all of which seems quite unnerving, disconcerting, or even intimidating. So pending testing completion with any number of use case scenarios one could possibly think of, then little engineered feats like these might see adoption in the battlefield. Frightening stuff. Also, the drone itself used is certainly not your standard smaller single-foot FPV drone, for instance, but instead seems to be closer to the size of the larger heavy-hitting Baba Yaga drones, which is exactly what something like this would need, because without some stable flight metrics, then the more prolonged the firing, the more noticeable the recoil. Then, as part of a really quick video today, we'll round it off with a couple of quick funnies. So, starting off, remember Zelensky's wanted status from the Russian Interior Ministry website back on May 4th? Where he was wanted under an article of the Russian Criminal Code without providing any further details at all. Well, they took it down. No longer wanted, I guess. Or they weren't creative enough to think of anything to put as a reason for his wanted status. But perhaps they just didn't want us to risk making a big joke out of it later. Also for this, I love how they used Zelensky's pre-invasion mugshot, with that comedic look on his face. Not that we can blame the guy, as he actually used to be a comedian. Then, speaking of comedians, we'll wrap it up today with a quick final funny, as Russia's top propagandist, Solovyov, or Uncle Solly, once again was recently pushing his bizarre narratives. Not the least of which was this little chestnut, to say that he always felt that Finland wanted to go back to the Russian Empire. But even the panelists, including RT editor-in-chief Simonyan, couldn't seem to hold back a smirk or embarrassing chuckle at that laughable suggestion. Ah, the late-night Russian comedy hour never ceases to be a value-for-money class act. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like and comment, and I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers!